Thanks for tuning in to the Urban Scope podcast. I'm back with more comedy news, another topic I don't discuss this much, but I've seen a topic recently that I wanted to discuss that I was interested in, something that I knew a lot about, and that's ranking the kings of comedy um, by funniest, of course. So, of course, Spike Lee directed this back in the late 90s. I believe it was 1999. One of the most important films of comedies in urban culture and black culture that features some of the most legendary comedians of our time. You have Steve Harvey, Cedric the Entertainer, D.L. Hughley, and of course Bernie Mac, rest in peace. Some of the funniest comedians ever in Black history or in comedy history ever, just not Black history, but comedian history or comic history. And ranking these guys now is it's not as difficult as most would think, at least for me, just because I look for certain things in comedians. I look for range mostly. I look for comedians that not only can just tell random funny jokes, but we can tell tie it back to social issues and tie it to current events a lot. So that's why I have a huge respect for comedians like a Chris Rock, a D.L. Hughley, because they have that range like that. Now, some comedians can overshadow that just by their pure comedy, the way they tell jokes, their posture, a lot of things like that. Some people are just naturally funny. They don't have to tie it in. So there are a couple of exceptions for that, i.e., a Bernie Mac. Now, I remember watching the Kings of Comedy as a kid. I probably was like 12 years old, um, but realizing how rare that moment was now and how we don't have that and probably never be duplicated. But in another segment, I'll talk about a new Kings of Comedy that I would like to see if they reproduced it and they put a different director as well with it, who I would like to see in a director spot. But I'll do that on another segment. But this segment here is just talking about how do I rank the comedians that were on stage, the original Kings of Comedy. You know, your Steve Harvey, Bernie Mac, Cedric the Entertainer, D.L. Hughley. How do you rank them? And um, I have it ranked as so. Now, fourth and the last person I have on the stage is Steve Harvey. Now, his comedic styles never resonated with me just because, but I always felt he was a pioneer of comedy because he was one of the earlier acts. Um, but I always felt like he wasn't just naturally funny, like he was trying to be funny or it was a job for him. So I always had Steve Harvey ranked fourth on that stage just for that simple fact. But I do respect him as a pioneer. I think he done a lot for comedians behind him. Like the DC Young Fly talked about meeting him and the advice he gave him and others, and him doing Family Feud, just being able to show different range and just keep it like that. But I do have him last ranked on that stage for the Kings of Comedy. Third, I have Cedric the Entertainer. Cedric had great moments and is probably one of the most relatable in content. But the whole joke stealing thing from Cat Williams kind of threw him down there. I still think he's pretty funny. And on that Steve Harvey show, he was the funnier one. I think it should have been a Cedric Entertainer show because he was funnier than Steve Harvey on that show. Well, for all of that show, in my opinion. He can reach people, but I feel like he just lacked the natural funniness that a comedian can have. But he's still funny in my opinion, and he was the he was the third funniest on that stage that night, in my opinion. And then of course, two, I have D.L. Hughley. He had the most range on that stage to be able to relate current events to now and relate and be the most relatable as well, talking about childhood stuff that we all went through. Ironically, even though if you grew up in California like he did and grew up in Memphis like I did, we went through some of the same things in different generations as well. So it was a lot of relatability and understandability that he had on that stage. And then later he got more political about things, but he was able to relate that to layman's terms for the everyday citizen that doesn't understand what's going on in current events and politics. He's able to tie those things in and be able to make it more relatable. And you're like, huh, it's interesting. So he's very similar to Chris Rock in that manner, but he does have a quick wit and relentlessness when it comes to comedy. And I felt he was more genuine than Cedric and Steve were. His comedy is unforgiving. Like he doesn't care what you think. You know, his opinion is his opinion. And even when you see the Vlad interviews today, he still gives his opinion, and Vlad doesn't understand it because, and he disagrees with it because, for one, Vlad is, you know, a part of the culture, but he's not the culture. So he doesn't understand a lot of things and the perspectives that D.L. Hughley comes from. And D.L. Hughley is able to have natural funny ability without even laughing at it because he's just his way of thinking and it's just naturally funny. So I had to put him the second funniest on the stage. So that only leaves one person, of course. The Mac Man, Bernie Mac, rest in peace, was the funniest person on that stage. He's the most organic comedian. He's the most real, the realest person that was on that stage. He didn't mince any words. He didn't pander to anybody. When he talked about his parenting, he, you know, he puts out what he does, and you know, if you like it, you like it. If you don't, you don't. But Bernie Mac is definitely missed because of his uh, authenticity, um, especially on that stage. His TV show was one of the best TV shows out there because it was so honest and it was just so him. And like I said, he was the most organic. He could tell jokes and not laugh because that's just the way he thinks, similar to what D.L. Hughley does. And there's not a larger than life persona or personality like Bernie Mac has, and we don't have that in the game anymore. Most comedians now, you know, are worried about what they say. I don't think Bernie Mac ever cared or mattered what he said. You know, going back to Def Jam days and him wearing the jeans with his picture on it, legendary status type stuff. Him on House Party 3 was one of my favorite roles that he had. Other than Soul Man, Soul Man is one of the funny movies of all time with him and Samuel L. Very underrated movie that is getting discussed a lot, and I believe that was the last movie he did before he passed away. But on that stage that night, nobody could see Bernie Mac on that stage. He was closing it out, of course, because he was the funniest, and everybody knew that. So he might not have the biggest name out of four, but he's most respected out of his contemporaries in the comedian sense. And most people still revere him today. And he had the most quoted lines in that special about the milk and cookies, uh, the MFer soliloquy that he put out at the end that he closed out with. So he had so many classic moments, all classic bits, and he stood out from the rest. So that's my order of top four of the four comedians on that stage: Steve Harvey, Sage and Entertainer, D.L. Hughley, and funniest is Bernie Mac. Tell me your order of the original Kings of Comedy. Until next time, see you next time.